Ports are the lifelines of our economies, moving 80% of global trade. But they are also hotspots for emissions, wastes, and habitat destruction, while facing climate risks and other threats. The challenge is urgent, but it's also an opportunity to transform ports into hubs of innovation, efficiency, and resilience. Today, we're joined by experts who will inspire us with practical strategies and success stories on shaping green and resilient ports that cut emissions, improve air quality, and drive sustainable, future-ready growth across Southeast Asia. The webinar begins shortly. Please stay tuned.
Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth webinar in this series of webinars focused on green ports, where we're aiming to spotlight what leading ports around the world are doing to address some of these challenges and explore their approaches and how they can be adapted across Southeast Asia. So today we're focusing on cruise and tourism, and cruise and tourism ports play a vital role in enabling economic growth, regional connectivity, and cultural exchange. Globally, cruise tourism continues to rebound strongly following the pandemic and bringing renewed opportunities for ports and operators, but also intensifying pressures on infrastructure, local communities, and sensitive and coastal and marine environments. As passenger volumes grow, ports are increasingly judged not only on their capacity and efficiency, but how responsibly they manage those environmental impacts, community expectations, and long-term destination resilience. So today's session is going to explore how cruise and tourism ports and operators can support growth while safeguarding environmental values, strengthening community trust, and maintaining that social license to operate. Today's webinar is organised by the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which is managed by the ASEAN Power Grid and Special Funds Unit of ADB's Southeast Asia Regional Department. It is hosted by ADB's Southeast Asia Development Solutions Platform. ACGF is an ASEAN Infrastructure Fund initiative supporting governments in Southeast Asia to prepare and finance infrastructure projects that promote environmental sustainability and contribute towards climate change goals. ACGF is owned by ASEAN governments and ADB. So today, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our lineup of excellent speakers. We have Jessie McComb. Jessie joined the Asian Development Bank as Senior Tourism Industry Specialist, where she leads sustainable tourism, community of practice and designs, and implements impactful tourism investment projects. With over 20 years of experience, she's become a trusted advisor to both governments and businesses seeking to maximise the economic potential of tourism. So thanks, Jessie. We're looking forward to hearing from you in a moment. We also have Phil Jordan. Phil is the Director of Sustainability and Delivery at Scenic Group, where he leads the integration of sustainability across global cruise and touring operations. With over a decade of experience at Scenic, Phil has held senior operational and regional leadership roles, including General Manager for Asia, providing deep insight into tourism operations across Southeast Asia. And we also have Scott Laguerre. Scott is the Global Director of Waterfront Planning and Design at Moffat and Nichol, a leading firm with planning and development of ports, cruise terminals, and waterfront infrastructure globally. With more than 3 decades of experience in waterfront and maritime planning, he brings deep expertise in integrating port operations, urban interfaces, environmental constraints, and long-term resilience considerations. A fantastic lineup of speakers, I'm sure you will agree with me. And I think we'll dive straight in today, and we'll start with our first speaker, Jessie. So Jessie, if you would like to take centre stage and share your slides, we'll hand over to you.
And I wish I could see more of you who have joined us online. The beauty of these webinars is that they can have many people in attendance from all over the world. The challenge is often that I can't see your smiling faces to be able to react to them. But first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to speak on this panel and speak as a part of this series. This is a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to talk a little bit more about tourism and what ADB is in tourism and what doing in tourism and how we can support our member countries to be able to develop their tourism industries. And to kick us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we work in this sector and why we think that this is important. And it's because tourism is a major driver of economic growth around the world. Just last year, it contributed over $13 trillion to the global economy, and that's more than 10% of global GDP. So this is really providing a lot of great opportunities for economies all around the world. And this economic boon really requires strong policies, strong infrastructure to be able to drive revenue generation and sustainability. Bringing us a little bit closer to the Asia Pacific region, this tourism is incredibly important for our DMCs. In ASEAN alone, tourism creates over 13% of jobs, and this is actually higher than the global average, which is about 10% of jobs. And tourism is one of the few pathways for women, for youth, for rural communities to be able to tap into this global economy. And the great thing is that tourism has shown to be resilient. We all know the impacts that COVID-19 pandemic had on the sector, but we are seeing globally tourism has completely recovered from COVID. And while the Asia region was lagging a little bit, most countries anticipate that by the end of 2026, there will be a full recovery in terms of arrivals. And most of our DMCs have already seen this. And much of this demand for tourism is really driven by marine tourism experiences, and this includes cruise. And marine tourism is essentially any type of tourism that happens in, around, on top of, underneath the ocean. So this can include everything from these, massive cruise ships to all the way down to a kayaking adventure or scuba diving. And the industry has seen really strong growth in this market and continued interest in this market moving towards more sustainability and more sustainable options. For example, the conceptualization of tourism as a part of the blue economy, which is really focused on sustainable management of our ocean resources, has helped countries reshape and revalue their tourism industries. Tourism is considered about a third of the overall global blue economy. And similarly, growth in marine tourism segments like cruise and yachting as well has stimulated interest in our DMCs to really think about how to sustainably develop these sectors for more local benefit, local economic benefit and job creation. Cruise, for example, is a growing segment in the Asia Pacific region, and it received about 4 million cruisers. Globally, we saw about 40 million cruisers, and then in the Asia Pacific region, about 4 million. And I think what's interesting here is that globally, we know that there's a very strong trend towards cruise. We saw it recover quite quickly after the pandemic, and we see more and more parts of the market becoming interested in different types of cruises. And I think the interesting thing about this 4 million number in Asia Pacific is that while yes, it's significant for the region, it's only 11% of the overall market, right? And I think this demonstrates that there is strong potential for continued growth. We know that this is a globally growing segment, and we can be doing more in the Asia Pacific region. But that also means we need to be thinking about how we are investing in this sector to be able to get more of this demand and more benefit for our countries. But on the other side, having strong demand across different types of marine segments like the cruise industry doesn't really mean that your country, your economy, your business, or your citizens are necessarily benefiting from tourism. And the benefit that different countries can derive from tourism really depends on the structure of your industry, the ownership and management of your tourism assets, the investment incentives that your governments might be providing, and the capacity of the workforce of small businesses to be able to tap into this market in a profitable way. And so depending on all of these things, it's possible that we can be engaging in tourism, or countries can be engaging in tourism and not really getting the full economic value out of the industry. And we also have to think about the other side of the picture, that while countries can benefit from tourism, there's lots of opportunities for potential impact, that the tourism industry can also have what are called negative externalities, right? These are sort of negative pressures coming out of the industry, mostly unintentional, sometimes intentional, but we really need to think about where these are coming from. They can come from poor waste management, inefficient resource usages, and even things like over tourism. And so even in destinations that seem pristine. You can see a beautiful beach. This is what the tourists see, right? They don't necessarily see what the landfill looks like on the other side of the island or on the next island over that is being impacted. And this picture, these two pictures you see on the screen are actually from the very same place. And so we really need to think about how to manage these negative externalities in tourism, and really thinking about how they're putting pressure on our sensitive environments, or potentially on our overburdened waste management, energy, wastewater management systems that are happening behind the scenes. And without implementing sustainable management, destinations can really risk eroding the natural, the cultural, the social assets on which tourism built. And that really undermines this concept of sustainability. One point I want to touch on quickly here from the cruise sector perspective, in addition to waste management, which is a big issue, are also the spread of invasive species. This is causing billions of dollars in economic damage globally, as well as the loss of biodiversity and heritage values. And in fact, invasive species are one of the top 5 global threats to biodiversity. And why is this important? Is because cruise ships can often carry these unintentional stowaways on board. And sometimes these are coming just from the local produce they have on board, from the discharge of raw ballast water into different waters, or even just what guests are bringing on board intentionally or unintentionally. And so this is something we need to think about as we strengthen our environmental sustainability within the sector. And but the good news is that policymakers and governments can create policies and invest in programs that can really drive sustainable growth of the cruise and marine tourism sectors, and address some of these underlying or potential negative externalities. But we need to think about, where do we make these policy interventions? Where do we make these investments? And that really covers a whole range of different areas, from infrastructure to skills development, to tourism asset development, private sector development, and to regional coordination, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Sorry, I'm having trouble changing my slides here. There we go. And specifically within the infrastructure space, there are multiple trends in the marine and cruise tourism industry that can offer new opportunities. So, for example, Asia is still lagging in terms of what would be onshore power supply for the cruise ships. And this is one of the key areas where the cruise industry has an opportunity to reduce their emissions. Many of the high emissions that come out of these big cruise ships happen while they're sort of sitting in port, or they're berthed in port, and they're just having to run their generators in a single place. And if they were able to tap into an onshore power supply that is coming from a renewable source, that can significantly reduce their emissions that they're creating. However, Asia Pacific only has about 18% of these ports globally, and most of them are in China, right? So there's a really big opportunity for further investment in this area, in the port infrastructure in ASEAN and the Southeast Asia area. And there's also a need to consider how infrastructure might be able to adapt to changes we're seeing in the cruise industry. We know that ships are getting larger, and they're going to need more port facilities to be able to accommodate them. And we also know that there's more opportunities for things for home porting. And home porting is basically the port of call where the ship takes on passengers, and usually the ship starts there and then returns there, and passengers fly in and fly out of that destination. And it's also the port where the ship will resupply many of their materials. And this can really provide significant economic benefit for that country where the home port is. But of course, you need the infrastructure to go along with it. There's a growing trend in the Caribbean, for example, to have more of these locally based cruise ships that generate more economic benefit, and particularly for heavily cruise dependent countries like the Bahamas or Antigua and Barbuda. But it does come with challenges, and it does also require significant investments. And at the same time, there's also opportunities for destinations to be looking at smaller ships, at the expedition and exploration ships, which we know is a growing part of the industry. And so these ships maybe need a little bit less infrastructure in some ways, or smaller scaled infrastructure. But you do need to think about the types of experiences that these ships and this market is looking for. And hopefully some of my fellow presenters will talk a little bit about that. So I won't go too much into it now. But then we also need to think about what happens outside of the infrastructure, right? So having a nice port might facilitate a ship to come in. It might reduce emissions. It might support sustainability. There might be good waste management there. But that's not why a cruiser would come to your port, right? The reason that they're going to choose an itinerary that has your port of call as a part of it is the experiences and the products and the marketing that goes along with that port of call. And we know that tourists are really looking for these more authentic and more personal types of experiences when they are on ground. Um, so in Fiji, the International Finance Corporation did a really interesting study. It's a little bit old at this point, but I think it still has some great data that can help us understand what a cruise passenger might be looking for and how destinations might be able to maximize the benefit of their cruise sector. So we see that satisfaction and dwell time are directly related to the overall spending per passenger. Visitor satisfaction increased across the ports of call, spending also increased. We also saw that passengers who spent more than 4 hours in port, so that's what we would call dwell time in port, had significantly larger passenger spending per passenger. And you can see that spending is that purple line there. And the study also found very interesting that there is about half of passengers said they would have spent more money if there were better things to purchase or more experiences to purchase, right? So that's a big amount of money that's being left on the table if your port of call doesn't have products and experiences to being able to offer these visitors. So when we think about cruise destinations, it's important to think about how we make it easy for people to access the destination, stay in the destination, and purchase experiences and products that they actually want. And we need to do this by looking across the tourism value chain. And even in this sort of simplified version of the value chain, we can really understand how complex it is. We know that we need to include all of these different stakeholders in creating a destination and delivering these types of experiences. The cross-industry, cross-government coordination that's required to deliver a cohesive experience. And the way that I kind of like to put this is that most destinations are kind of a loosely organized collection of small and medium-sized businesses, right? They all maybe sort of know each other, maybe they don't, right? But in order to create a cohesive experience that really appeals to a tourist, you have to have that coordination. You have to be able to ensure that there's good quality standards across these businesses, that these businesses are able to work together to create new products and new experiences that can attract a new market or even maybe a higher value market to your destination. Now, specific opportunities exist. These are come out of this the study that Fiji did or that IFC did in Fiji. And I think what's quite interesting is that it looked at what do local businesses in the destination want, what do the cruise lines want, and what do the governments want to be able to make this better and have more valuable cruise sector. Local businesses said that they really wanted to have more information on when cruise ships are actually coming into the port. They wanted to have more marketing of their products and experiences on board. And they wanted to make sure that there was that sort of last mile connectivity of transportation between the port and the sort of centers of tourism business. Cruise lines, on the other hand, said they wanted more detailed and realistic information and marketing about the destination. So you can already see here, there's a lot of synergy between what businesses want and what cruises want, but how do we make that happen? They also wanted formal dialogues with governments to improve the port experience and to share market intelligence about what their customers actually wanted on ground. And governments wanted more information about overall demand forecasts from the long term, right? So that they could rationalize and justify some of these expensive investments that they might need to be making in the sector to get more value out of it. And from a policy perspective, there are a number of actions that governments can consider to build more sustainability and resilience and drive this economic benefit. So this can facilitate greater access to green energy, work on regional cooperation, harmonize your regulations, harmonize your taxes and fees, work together on developing itineraries that really speak to the market. This is a great opportunity for the ASEAN group. Strengthening environmental monitoring and enforcement. Really preparing your MSMEs and your workforce, making sure they know what cruise visitors want so they can design products and experiences that appeal to them. And then, of course, strengthen your local linkages through partnerships, networks, and product development. I've gone on a little bit too far, but I will end here by saying that I know that all of this seems like a lot, right? We have to do everything. There's this huge value chain. It's complex. We need to make it all work together. That's what ADB is here for, right? We are here to help you navigate the development challenges, tap into these opportunities, and design and create projects and investments that really help you get more value out of your cruise sector and out of your tourism industries. So thank you very much. I will hand back to the presenters, and hopefully we can have a good conversation.
Thanks so much, Jessie. That was a fantastic opening presentation for our session today, and really does kind of provide that context for the ports themselves and the operators that operate within those ports. So thanks. I really appreciate what you've delivered, and we're looking forward to kind of seeing how that kind of folds in with our next speakers. So please hold on for Q&A. We do have a Q&A question box. So if anyone is listening today and does have any questions, please do use that function to share your questions, and we will either answer them as we go through, or we'll answer them at the end in our dedicated Q&A session. So next, I'd like to invite Phil Jordan from Scenic Group to the stage, the virtual stage. Phil, if you would like to share your slides and take the lead.
Okay, so thanks, Jackie, for the introduction, and thank you, Jessie. That was really interesting, and of course, thank you everyone who's here on this call. It's very much appreciated. So I'll take a bit of a different lens to Jessie, and it will be a bit of a finer lens on this. But as Jackie noted, I've worked in the industry for over a decade. Predominantly, I've been on the Mekong and the Irrawaddy rivers. So I wear a few hats in the company across sustainability and operations and delivery. I'll give a quick apology in advance because there's parts of what I'll talk to which are slightly outside my area of expertise, so I will check some notes on them. But I thought maybe the best place to start, as you can see within Scenic Group, there is quite a few brands. So maybe just a brief history of our company is a good place to start. So Scenic Group had 40 years ago now, pretty much very humble beginnings in Australia, actually on the Great Ocean Road. So it began just operating small land journeys in Australia. It then developed and expanded to operating its own fleet of vehicles, moved to New Zealand, Norfolk Island, North America and Canada, Africa, until it then set its sights on Europe and the European waterways there. In 2008, was really the pivotal game changer when the company started building and designing its own ships, the Scenic spaceships there, and then it just grew and grew and grew from there. In 2019 was another pivotal time where we entered the ocean market, and it was the Scenic Eclipse, the world's first discovery yacht, which entered the market. So this was a polar class vessel and truly all-inclusive 6-star luxury, 228 guests, and really nothing like it that had ever been built before. The Emerald Yacht Club followed shortly after, 100 passenger ships. So as you can see, very much a smaller ideas than a lot of other operators out there. And I think currently today we have 25 river vessels which operate globally around the world in various regions, 4 operating on the ocean, 2 in polar class, 2 in the Emerald Yacht Club in the Med, and that number of ocean vessels will double within the coming years, and there's another 4 or 5 river ships there. So the focus has always been quality over quantity, kind of treading where others haven't before in terms of design and conception, and really creating these lifelong memories for our guests. So my intention in this very short window will be predominantly to focus on river cruising in Southeast Asia for obvious reasons, but there can also be ocean applications to that. I believe that comes outside of there. Port construction design is not my area of expertise. There's others on this panel where they're more suited there. So I wanted to speak beyond just the physical structures and the ports themselves, because I really think sustainability thrives when there's this interrelationship between these various ESG factors, and when they're not treated as silos, but they're actually viewed holistically and then operate as a collective entity. So I'll try to use examples and case studies to tie this all together. So if it seems like I'm drifting off on a tangent or two, just bear with me and hopefully it all comes together for you. So within Scenic Group, we have our sustainability focus, which we call Cherish the Planet, which focuses on some various pillars on reducing our waste, addressing our emissions, sourcing sustainably, growing with communities, growing from within, valuing diversity, and advocating health and safety. Now, I think these pillars can be unified and actually work in lockstep with the ports. You know, we need to engage with communities and our partners. We need to align our touring, our F&B offerings. We need to consider procurement and how we do it. And we also need to educate our guests, our staff, our partners, and the communities there. And I believe that the port can really be an enabler to all of this. Now, many of the rivers where we operate, especially in the more remote regions where on the Mekong or on the Irrawaddy previously, the port could change day to day depending on the weather conditions, what tree looked the sturdiest on any given day. But there was always opportunity and there was always regularity, as Jesse spoke to, with homecoming ports. But if I could think of the key considerations of developing and wanting to have these more sustainable or green ports there's a couple of things that jump to mind. Number one is stable shore power, you know, not just the ability or the connection or the ship to have that connection port, but you need a stable network to go with that. If the network's not stable, then obviously the blackout potential will increase and you'll get engineers and captains defaulting to starting up generators. I think the guest and crew facilities of the port are important. I think the guest facilities almost seem like a given or very obvious, but I think crew facilities are often overlooked. And to me, whether it be the vessel or the port, it's an old saying, but it's a very true saying that a ship's only ever going to be as good as the crew on it. And if you're not looking after the crew, then you're never going to be able to deliver that end-to-end guest experience that you desire. So having that care and opportunity extend beyond the vessel itself, I think it's directly linked to the enjoyment, the health and safety, both physical and mental, for the crew. And the port really plays a vital role in this. And sometimes I think it's slightly overlooked. Waste separation and collection points, transparency of that entire life cycle, you know, for obvious reasons, as well as material, labor, being local, and, you know, where it's available and appropriate. And also clean water refill stations. Seems like a simplistic one in a lot of developing areas. I'll try and touch on a case study later, but I think the fact that this needs to be available beyond for just crew, guests, port employees, but also surrounding communities, especially within more developing regions, especially on rivers, is actually a really important factor. So to try and look at some of these things in isolation or to try and tie them together, obviously procurement and how we source is very important. We have guidelines, a lot of undertakings in which we do, and internal training throughout all our global ocean and river operations and land as well. What you see on the screen is, you know, relatively straightforward around procurement principles and factors and what our overall objectives are. But if we strip back the layers a little bit, take for example, you know, our menu inclusions there, this ties directly into the procurement, obviously, but when we have our various vessels around the world, we train the staff responsible for this on certain considerations they should be making when creating what is offered to our guests. And the more this is considered, you always hear, you know, food can tell a story, and if you can tie that procurement and what goes into a menu into minimizing your emissions, tying it to the culture, linking it to the touring, how those suppliers you're working with, how you're screening them, are they accredited, what considerations would they give into innovation and circularity, or how crops might be grown. It changes the way you look at things. I guess one small example of this would be on our ships on the Mekong, we always offer for breakfast a dish called Unmanaged chopped noodles. Now, this was one of the kind of original case studies, or to start this many, many years ago, but we procure from the local markets. We put a lot of research into the amount of different types of noodles and rice and where they come from and how they're made, and is staggering. So putting that research in to procure the right ingredients, to be able to put the story behind it, having herb gardens on the sun decks of our vessels to get those fresh ingredients every morning, it actually ties it together beyond just minimizing packaging, transportation emissions, what comes with storage, which isn't required doing it this way. But it really, you can really see it through the guests of the difference this makes. It tells a story, it educates them about why we're doing it this way and what it happens. And I think there's this misconception that sustainability and a luxury or an elevated guest experience are kind of mutually incompatible, where I truly believe the opposite of that to be true, that you do this in the right way, you will really elevate a guest experience. And this flows on in exactly the same way to how we look to create our touring inclusions across the group. What key considerations do we really need to be thinking about when we're designing what we're doing? We're not always going to be able to tick every box. That's not the intention. The intention is that our journey designers and the people that are really at the coalface of how we create this are engaging with the right stakeholders, having the right level of consultations, considering what this looks like in 5 years' time or when the vessels aren't there. And by going through these motions and this training and embedding it, it not only enhances the guest experience, but it works better for the communities and the places in which we're visiting. So I guess a couple of quick examples. I mean, I took a few pages from our impact reports. In Cambodia, we originally partnered with Cambodia's first premier rum distillery. And we did a tour by night through the streets of Phnom Penh to showcase the city and the culture, which ended at the distillery. And we ended up creating these cocktails together, which used to be sold and generate revenue for PSC, which is, my French is terrible, it's Point d'Enfant, which I believe is for a child's smile. So they have worked since the mid-90s on feeding, housing, educating families within specific trades across a whole suite of different job opportunities. And the work they do is really amazing. So just by knowledge of this company, we wanted to help them. But then we realized quite quickly that the sale of the cocktails, which our guests loved, and visiting the distillery and knowing that it was helping PSE, that wasn't really the best thing we could be doing. It was what did we have that we could offer them in terms of letting their students come on board the ships and do work placement training, going to the distilleries and learning how to do those roles there, going to the training schools and working with them to deliver certain training sessions, and then providing job opportunities for them. We have quite a number of them working on board our vessels now, and there's a number working in the distilleries as well. And we're seeing it go from strength to strength, which I think is actually a really, really good thing. Every 4 or 5 years, we might have to change out linens on board the ships, or actually it's a lot more regular than that, mattresses, examples. And PSE has become a place where that can be used in their training schools as well. So as each month passes with them, we continually grow in this regard. Conscious of time here. So another one is years ago, I think probably about 2016, 17, decision was made on our Asian vessels where they will be single-use plastic-free for the guests. Now that covers a whole range of things across amenities and everything there, but the big one was obviously the water bottles. A lot of companies now are out there that are they don't use plastic water bottles anymore. But there's a lot more to it than that once you dive below the surface. You can't just have someone turn up and give them a plastic bottle and say refill that if you're not providing the means or the education around how and where to do that. So we put a lot more work into this, and beyond just providing our guests with a high quality stainless steel refillable bottle, we had to educate our guests. So the biggest problem we had was misconception with our staff and also with our guests around, this is what we've been told, or this is how we believe it should work, and I don't trust the water on the ship. And by educating them and then also partnering with a company within the Vina Capital Foundation that focuses on providing clean water to remote and rural communities and schools, we found that we were able to make a lot more impact. So there is so many, access to clean drinking water is central, or the starting point to so many health and societal issues in the developing world. So you can't expect their child to go to school and get a better education and grow to their full potential if they're not healthy. And so we knew that this was going to be a really important part to do, but we also wanted to get the wider communities involved. We wanted to educate our staff. We wanted to educate our guests as well. So a lot of what we do now is pre-communicate with the guests, tell them if they're anything like me and they have a cupboard with their family at home that has a lot of water bottles or refillable bottles in there which are hardly used, that bring them with them before they start their trip. Look at what we're doing over there, bring these bottles. They can then be donated to existing products and the existing projects and the projects which will follow. And when we install these clean water filtration systems, we're also providing the education as to why it's so important to the teachers and the students. It has to be ensured that those filtration units are available to the wider community so that filters through. So we've found this to be really beneficial and something we want to continue to do. But in more remote areas on the river systems, there's no reason why that can't be applied to the ports as well and have that connection. So these are relatively quick, broad examples to show there. But I think by having ports which are there that help enable these connections around logistics, community, government partnerships, F&B procurement, touring inclusions, it doesn't only support the local communities, it educates the key stakeholders, it educates our guests, and I think it's a good collective step in the right direction. So it's a different approach and it's a different look at this, but hopefully that angle and perspective does help.
Thanks so much, Phil, for that really insightful presentation. And I really like the way that you describe ports as enablers for some of these sustainability impacts and the interconnectivity of that, and also the importance of those kind of crew facilities. Sometimes, seafarer welfare is a really important thing. And so as part of the kind of port infrastructure piece, having facilities to not just support the cruise guests themselves, but also, I guess, the other stakeholders that are part of that value chain. So to really appreciate that. We do have some questions starting to come through into the Q&A, but please do feel free to use that if you have any questions for Phil or Jesse or maybe Scott after his presentation in a moment. Please do use that, and we'll get to answering some of those when we get to the Q&A session. But next up we have Scott. So Scott's from Moffat and Nicol and is going to be talking to us about sustainable cruise destinations from a design and planning perspective. So I will hand over to Scott to take it forward.
Great. Good afternoon, and grateful, as all the other speakers are, to be on this panel and to share with you some different perspectives within green port planning, and specifically how it is applied in the cruise sector. I think as you have heard from the two previous panelists, you get a good sense of the industry's growth and how lines and how a specific line is responding to that growth and leveraging some important opportunities to be more sustainable through their operations. And my goal in the few minutes that I have is to share with you some of the approaches and techniques that we use and that ports and destinations use to be more sustainable and to address some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that are out there. I think as Jesse, when she kicked off, spoke to all of the participants today, and as I'm sure all of you know, the industry has really been growing phenomenally. And the projection work that I and Moffett and Nickel does, we expect that we're approaching in the coming year, by the end of 2026, about 40 million guests will be cruising on ocean-going vessels worldwide. Our forecasts have that this will probably double by 2050 to be 80 million guests cruising on ships in pretty much every region around the world. And of course, the Caribbean and the Med, and some of those will continue to be the bellwether locations, but the Asia Pacific region holds tremendous promise. And we certainly expect them to receive their fair share over time of that growth as well. What propels the industry to grow is lots of different factors. It's the shipyards and their ability to deliver the vessels that are ordered and that are desired by cruise passengers. It's the lines and the ships that they cruise that helps grow the capacity and the inventory of beds that are out there in the marketplace. It's the passengers. And as they learn about in some markets like Asia Pacific, many guests haven't even been exposed to what a cruise vacation is like. And the lines have been very active in trying to, bring these new to cruise, these first time cruisers, and make them lifelong participants. In each one of these categories, you're seeing commitments to green and sustainable strategies, whether it's the shipyard, whether it's the lines, and through the Cruise Line International Association's commitment to being net zero carbon by 2050, to even passenger behaviors, how passengers consume the cruise. But the one that we are mostly involved with as a company, and that I think is very relevant to this conversation, is the ports and the destinations. And what can operators of ports, which are increasingly a major player in that space, whether it's Global Ports Holding or SSA or ports, many other different companies that are in that space, Abu Dhabi Ports, or it is the governments in the states and the others that are sort of part of the delivery of home port and port of call infrastructure. And speaking specifically to how you plan and how you think about some of the considerations for sustainable design and planning and operation of cruise port destinations, I'm just going to highlight three. It's a very, comprehensive topic. And in the time I have, really just to kind of knock on 3 points, I think is the best use of our time. And I think two is just to be really clear on terminology. I know I've spoken about ports, and I'm also referring to destinations. The port really is the receiver of either or the facilitator of a home port, right? The cruise begins or ends at a defined series of infrastructure, the navigation channels, the berth, the terminal, the ground transportation area. A destination is really everything that is encompassed in moving the guests from the airport to the port, if it's a home port, getting the guests from the cruise ship to the entirety of the destination. The scale is quite different. And in fact, the things that those entities that I just mentioned, the Port Authority, the operator, the government, their ability to sort of push and pull the different levers at a destination level is much more challenging than it would be, say, at a port level. And so a lot of times you're having conversations and trying to control what you can control at the destination scale, but certainly trying to also focus and maximize what sometimes is the easier of the two, and that's what's happening at the port. And as I talked about, that port could be a home port facility where you've got cruise terminals and you've got shore power connections and passenger boarding bridges and lots of logistics that are happening. Or it could be a place like Perfect Day Coco Cay, where I've worked in design since 2016, and it's a purpose-built location where guests get off and they have all sorts of different amenitization and experiences. Each one of those examples has a different level of infrastructure that you can deploy to make it more green, more sustainable, and also meet all of the other requirements that are being delivered in the guest experience. When I, and as a practitioner, and when we as a firm are involved at planning at a port and a destination level, we are very much working with layers. And one of the most important things we focus on right out of the gate is, what is our design day? How many guests do we have coming off? At what amount of time are they coming off? How are they going to get around? How long is the cruise ship going to be there in port? All of these different factors moving across the spectrum of what are the assets that the port has to have, what are the amenitization, all the way through sustainability, that final layer as to how we can make the port more sustainable, more green over time. And in that layer, we look at lots of different things. I know it's been mentioned a few times on shore power. Shore power is a great way to reduce emissions in a port environment, especially associated with a cruise ship. The challenge there is not only the availability of power, but I will also say, the quality of the fuel that's in the local power plant. There are many scenarios, and I've done lots of modeling in a place like San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's actually environmentally more beneficial to have the ship run its fuel than it is to plug into the local grid. The grid and the inputs are very dirty, and it's also unstable. And so it's not a one size fits all when we talk about shore power, and you really look as to the inputs, you look at the cost of deploying shore power versus other sustainable things you could do, like renewables on site, electrification of ground transportation vehicles, certain detention and treatment of rainwater and reuse, beneficial reuse of water on site. There's all sorts of arrows in our quiver to create and operate these sustainable port facilities and do so in a way that over time is beneficial both to the destination, but also to the line who's delivering this experience as well. The second point is, and I think it also was touched on, is this need for continual community involvement and communication. In certain locations, if you're not talking to the indigenous population, the residents, the hoteliers, and the others, and there are problems, they will be talking to you. And in fact, you may not like some of the things that they say, and things can spiral out of control. And as you've read, in Barcelona and Dubrovnik, Croatia, and in Venice, and many other locations and places throughout Alaska, the conversation of, is this really a social contract that we want to continue to support in our community, becomes very real. And there's misinformation, and there are missed opportunities to really move through a transparent, trust-building dialogue between the users, between the community, between the folks that are involved in delivering that experience, and all of the other stakeholders that are in the community. We're huge advocates, both in the design standpoint and the design process, where you're moving from a vision through understanding, exploring, and deciding a way to go, to have continuous and transparent civic and stakeholder involvement, but to also create those ways later in the process through implementation and operation, where you can have those ongoing conversations and receive the feedback so that you can make adjustments. And two, importantly, is building capacity in a community. It's not just about saying, hey, here's what we're going to do, but it's like, here's how you'll benefit. Here's how we'll train ground transportation operators to benefit from cruise guests being, in this location. Here's how we can help shopkeepers and retailers have better products that will hopefully elicit more spending. And we do that in a lot of different locations in clever ways. One of the most recent places, and in fact, I was just there again last week, is in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and engaging not only the local populace as to what's most important for expanding a particular location on St. Thomas, but also engaging the cruise guests and trying to find the right alignment where that facility not only is delivering a great experience for the guests, but that facility is leveraging both economic and social benefit for the local population. And when there's not cruise ships there, oh yes, by the way, it's a great public engaging community asset that folks can also sort of utilize and be involved with. There's lots of different platforms that we use. There's lots of different ways that we engage. And it's a very important aspect of our design and planning and operation process. And so too is measuring our success. We have developed in-house models that assess destinations. They're, giving it a sustainability score at a planning level, at a construction level, at an operation level. We've also done this type of work for the World Wildlife Foundation and their relationship with the Royal Caribbean, so that we can go into a location and really sort of set, much like a green building assessment process, really assess how sustainable, what kind of practices and policies are being put into place, and most importantly, use that as a gauge and a learning tool to say, hey, these are areas where you can really effectuate much greater reductions in carbon, or much more transparency for the community, or, much fewer construction impacts associated with noise and dust and other types of things as well. We also will look certainly at emissions and carbon. And we have been very involved, especially with the lines, especially with Royal Caribbean and Carnival Corporation, and as they move in some of their private destination side, it's like, can we achieve zero carbon, or can we take a project that is already sort of in the planning stages, understand how we can avoid increased levels of emissions as part of the design that exists, and know that at day one, that we have an opportunity to, say, through use of biofuels and switching out aspects of the gen sets, so we could run biofuels, B20, B50, or something even better. And in fact, in the Bahamas, this opportunity where the cruise lines are already offloading fryer grease, there is a local manufacturer that's making that into biofuel, and that biofuel then goes into running gen sets at some of the private destinations. That's a great sort of story and loop of trying to do better and taking these different inputs and making something that is far more sustainable than the destinations. And so measuring these things and doing it in such a way that we're looking at, electricity use, we're looking at solid waste, we're looking at composting and all of the other things, whether it's a port of call or a home port, that really, really sort of move the needle when it comes to green design, sustainable design, and more thoughtful planning, operations, and delivery of these places moving forward. So with that, I'll hand it back over to our MC, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Scott, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And there's so much that we can talk about in this space. And I feel like we could probably sit here for at least another hour and discuss all the various aspects that we've heard today. But I think, kind of really core themes are really around that kind of broader connectivity. It's not just about the port itself, it's the broader connectivity with those cruise destinations, and that engagement that you mentioned, Scott, was incredibly important. And we mentioned in our last webinar about social license to operate and stakeholder engagement being a critical part of that, and I think that really kind of ties in here as well. So I would like to invite all my panelists back to the screen. Thank you very much. We do have some time for some Q&A, so I will kick us off with a couple of questions. We've got a couple in the Q&A box, so please do feel free to add to those if you would like to. But Phil, there is one there for you. Well, there's actually probably a couple of questions in one for you there, but just thanking you for sharing your engaging examples of working with those communities and service providers. They're just wanting to know whether there's any sort of minimum requirements that Scenic have in place for port operators to meet as it relates to sustainability and
just looking at it now. So Jackie, thank you for the question. Yeah, not at a glance, not specifically for Southeast Asia, given the remoteness of some of the ports. This is more something which is more kind of leveraged on with our suppliers and partners that we work with. And it's something which goes out when we have our, we have procurement guidelines, we have obviously our impact reports and the way in which we want to work with our partners. So this is something where, for those who want to work with Scenic Group and we want to work with them, the more aligned they are with our ethos and that way working forward, then the more likely they are to get the business at the tender process. So I think, appreciate the question, but even with ports, when the options there are limited and it's kind of, cart before the horse kind of thing. I think it's almost backwards in that way. If they were like a supplier, then it would work there. But the more that the ports see that the customers want these things, the more likely the ports are to provide these options. And I think that's the kind of avenue that we're looking to take there. And Scott made some really great points about shore power as well, which I've talked a lot about with people there, that everyone believes shore power to be this magic cure, but you look when ships in Europe are docked 10 deep and they're trying to run cords across them, and people are tripping over them, or the ships are going into blackout and they're running the generators, and it's not just as simple as replace the fuel with the plug. And same with different biofuels. You want to test them, and you've got to redo the lines and spend 6 figures just to be able to test it, to find out it doesn't work and go back because of. So often what can appear simple on the surface gets a bit more complicated. But once they become the economically viable and best option and the best way to operate, I think that's when we'll really start to see those winds of change. And when that day comes, it'll be a better day for us all.
Thanks, Bill. There's a great response, and I think that kind of leads into the next question actually that's popped up there. And I think for Scott, in terms of stakeholders, the questions in and around where are the strongest pushes for carbon neutrality? Does it come from the port developers, public sector, consultants, cruise companies? Can you expand on any of this, please?
Yeah, on the carbon neutrality, the lines themselves have really, really taken a very proactive stance, not only because they've pledged, to be zero carbon by 2015 as part of the Cruise Line International Association, but 3 of the 4 major conglomerates are publicly traded, and they are very much pursuing, ESG goals and trying for their shareholders to convey that they are, that some of the reputation that's out there that they're the worst polluters is in fact erroneous. And in fact, they are good partners, good stewards, and there's always room for improvement, and that they're investing their time and money in the technology, both in the ships, but also in their relationships with people on shore, to do better and to be better partners. And historically, you go back into the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, they probably weren't the best partners, in certain locations. But they've learned from that. And the other challenge too is, remember that many of these lines, they're operating at 400, 500 ports. They have a limited resource of people that can be in the communities. And so they're reliant on local partners, whether it be their agent, whether it be an operator, whether it be a government, whether it be the Port Authority, to sort of bring them in, and to help facilitate these dialogues to really do well by these communities, and to make sure that there's a strong social contract and partnership. And if there's problems, that they're trying to address them. So I really do believe that while there's all sorts of actors, I think the cruise lines have taken a great, not just first, but several steps in moving towards neutrality in many locations that they're operating.
Thanks, Scott. I'm conscious we've not got a huge amount of time left, and I know there's quite a few questions in the Q&A box. So if any of our speakers would like to kind of respond to those directly, please feel free to do so. But maybe this question for Jessie might kind of provide a kind of general response to a couple of those curiosities around attracting cruise lines to specific destinations. And so, Jessie, how can destinations differentiate when multiple ports within a region compete for the same kind of cruise itineraries? What can they do to set themselves apart and get that cruise liner to go there?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think this is a fantastic question, and this is something that you find quite interesting when you start really digging into the cruise market as a particular market segment, right? And even within that monolith, you have different sort of sub-market segments. Some people are more focused on it, exploration, adventure. Some people are a little bit more focused on wellness experiences or cultural heritage experiences. But one of the things that you find in the cruise market is that cruisers don't necessarily think of a port of call as being a specific country, they think of it as being the specific port of call, right? So, take the Fiji example. There were, I think, 5 different ports of call. And it's not that people think, oh, I'm going to Fiji. They think I'm going to Suva, to Savasavu, to Dunarau. And so really thinking about how you are differentiating the experiences between those ports is so important. And what that means is thinking about what is your unique value add? What is your unique position as that specific port of call? Do you have a cultural heritage site that you could really focus your experiences around? Are you a bit more of an adventure tourism destination? Do you have great gastronomy and you could market yourself as a sort of a food and beverage type of destination, right? It's really thinking about what do you as a port, right? Again, not as the country, but as that specific destination have to offer that other destinations don't necessarily have to offer. So that's going to help really drive and stimulate market demand. Now, from a sort of a cruise line perspective, they're also looking at a number of things, right? They're saying, does this fit into my overall itinerary? Are these 2 places too close together? Are they too far apart? So I think that there's also a lot of logistics that go into that decision-making process in terms of, can I add this place to an existing itinerary? Do I have to create a new itinerary to do it? And am I going to be able to sell that itinerary? Because we know that trends for the number of days in cruise for the number of days per cruise in Asia is more like 4, but in order to add that destination, I would have to make it a 6-day itinerary, and maybe that's not going to work with my market, right? So the short thing is understand who exactly your market is, which part of the cruise market are you trying to go after? Make sure that you are identifying the unique things in your destination that you can pitch and market for your specific port of call, not just for your country. And then think about the logistics and talk to the cruise lines. They want to offer new products. They want new experiences, right? Because they want new things to sell to the people who are coming back time and time again. But it's got to fit within the sort of logistical, technical constraints of what they can actually offer.
Thanks so much,
And
Jessie.
I would just quickly
Yeah.
piggyback on what Jessie was saying. Ports, they are, oh, I've got to have exactly what this guy has. I have to have this big terminal building. I have to have, you know what? You don't necessarily, in fact, many places don't need all of that stuff. They just need to deliver an authentic, safe experience for their guests and have the in-water infrastructure and just focus on what you truly need before you start chasing dollars over the building and all these other things. Many of those things are downstream and much later.
Great point.
Excellent. I'm apologies to kind of cut you both short. I would love to sit here for a little bit longer and keep chatting. I'm apologizing to those questions that we didn't quite get to this afternoon. We just ran out of time, but I'd really like to thank our panelists for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights and your inputs, and also thank you to our hosts, SEADS today, and obviously the ACGF and ADB teams as well for supporting this webinar. So we will see you for our next webinar, 19th of March, focused on fisheries and small-scale ports. So thanks again, everyone. See you soon. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.